When people talk about the greatest horror games ever made, you'll usually hear very similar names: Silent Hill, Resident Evil, Amnesia, and even Dead Space. But every now and then, there's a game that scares you in a completely different way. Not because of what you see, but because of what it makes you think. Soma isn't just a story about monsters lurking in dark hallways. It's a story about consciousness, identity, hope, and what it really means to be human. By the time the credits roll, the monsters almost become an afterthought. Instead, you're left questioning whether you would even recognize yourself if everything that made you could be copied. So today, I want to break down the story of Soma, explore its unforgettable characters, discuss the themes hidden beneath its science fiction horror, and finally, talk about an ending that I genuinely believe it is one of the darkest ever written in gaming history. Before we jump in, I do want to give a quick spoiler warning. Soma is one of those rare games where the less you know going in, the better. The story is built around mystery, discovery, and some truly unforgettable revelations, so if you've never played it, I highly recommend experiencing it for yourself. But if you've already finished the game, or if you're ready to just dive into everything I have to say about this, then let's descend into PATHOS-II and unravel one of the most thought-provoking stories ever told in gaming. Like all great horror stories, Soma begins somewhere incredibly ordinary. Here we meet Simon Jarrett, a young man living in Toronto after surviving a devastating car accident. The crash took the life of his close friend Ashley, while Simon was left with severe brain trauma that doctors are struggling to understand. As one final attempt to diagnose his condition, Simon agrees to undergo an experimental brain scan. It's a relatively simple procedure. He sits down, the machine powers on, the doctors tell him to relax, and then everything goes to black. When Simon wakes up, nothing makes sense. He's no longer in a doctor's office, instead he's standing inside PATHOS-II, a massive underwater research facility that appears completely abandoned. The lights barely work, the corridors are now flooded, machines seem almost alive, and whatever happened here, it happened a very long time ago. Immediately, Soma creates one of its greatest strengths, its mystery. The game rarely explains anything outright. Instead, it encourages the player to slowly piece together the truth through environmental storytelling, scattered recordings, abandoned workstations, and conversations with a few remaining inhabitants of the station. That sense of uncertainty is what makes PATHOS-II feel so believable. It doesn't feel like a level designed for a horror game, it feels like a real place where something went horribly wrong. As Simon explores deeper into the facility, he begins encountering things that shouldn't exist. Some people appear to be trapped inside broken machinery, desperately begging for help, while others become horrifying combinations of flesh and metal. And then there are the creatures roaming the halls. Unlike many horror games, these monsters aren't simply obstacles designed to chase the player. Each one represents another failed attempt to preserve human life. Even before the game explains why these creatures exist, it's already asking a very important question. Is staying alive always a good thing, or can survival become something worse than death? Eventually, Simon meets Catherine. Although meet might not be the right word, Catherine no longer exists in a traditional sense. Instead, Simon communicates with her through a portable computer module that accompanies him through most of the journey. From the very beginning, Catherine feels different from Simon. She's calm, logical, focused, and while Simon reacts emotionally to nearly every horrifying discovery, Catherine always seems to be thinking several steps ahead. Their personalities complement each other surprisingly well. Simon asks the emotional questions, while Catherine answers with silence. Together, they slowly uncover what happened on PATHOS-II. The Earth has already suffered a catastrophic extinction level event, humanity is effectively gone, and the people working at PATHOS-II weren't trying to save civilization anymore. They were trying to preserve whatever remained of it. That hope became the Ark, a digital world designed to carry human consciousness into space, preserving the last remnants of humanity long after Earth itself has become completely lifeless. For Simon, the mission suddenly becomes incredibly clear. Launch the Ark and give humanity one final chance. It's a beautifully simple objective, but the closer Simon gets to achieving it, the more uncomfortable the journey becomes. Standing in Simon's way is one of gaming's most fascinating antagonists, the WAU. At first glance, it seems like a fairly standard rogue artificial intelligence. It's responsible for the grotesque creatures scattered throughout PATHOS-II, the living machines, and the horrifying biological mutations found throughout the station. So naturally, Simon assumes the WAU is evil. But Soma rarely deals in simple ideas like good and evil. The deeper you explore, the more you realize that the WAU isn't malicious. It's just obedient. Its core directive is incredibly straightforward. Just preserve humanity. The real tragedy is that it follows those instructions with absolutely no understanding of what real humanity actually is. If someone is technically alive, even if they're trapped inside twisted machinery, even if they're suffering endlessly, even if they've completely lost their entire identity, the WAU considers that a success. It's one of the most terrifying ideas in the entire game because it reflects a very real problem with artificial intelligence. An AI can perfectly accomplish the task it's given while completely missing the purpose behind it. The WAU isn't trying to torture people, it's trying to save them. But that's what makes this so horrifying, because from its perspective, it doesn't see that it's doing anything wrong. It sees a person still living, and in its own mind, that is a complete success, despite this person having no identity and feeling absolutely nothing up to this point but pain and suffering. Long before Soma reaches its ending, it's already asking extremely philosophical questions most games would never even attempt. What separates a human from a machine? Is it our bodies, our memories, our emotions, or simply our belief that we're human? Nearly every conversation Simon has pushes these questions even further. The people he encounters blur the line between living and artificial. Machines express fear, broken bodies still speak, and some characters desperately are clinging to life, while others beg Simon to let them die. There is just never an easy answer, and instead, Soma constantly forces the player to decide for themselves. And that's exactly why the game's final revelation changes absolutely everything. Before we go any farther, I would just like to reiterate that this is going to be heavy spoiler warning for the ending of Soma. So if you don't want to know the ending, you can just skip now until the end. Up until this point, Soma has been asking extremely philosophical questions while giving the player very real choices. But in its final hour, it finally gives us the answer. And that answer completely recontextualizes everything we've experienced thus far in the story. By the time we've reached Soma's final act, it feels like we finally understand the mission that we've been taught the entire game. Launch the Ark, preserve humanity, and escape a dying Earth. Simple, right? Or at least, that's what Simon believes. Throughout the game, Simon has endured impossible horrors to get here. He's crossed the ocean floor, confronted the WAU, and watched humanity reduced to broken machines, and sacrificed more than once to keep moving forward. He has earned his happy ending, or so he thinks. But before we can understand the ending, we have to talk about the game's biggest revelation. Throughout the story, Simon, and by extension the player, believes that he is the same person who walked into the doctor's office in Toronto. Sure, something impossible has happened, but it feels like we've simply been transported into the future. But in actuality, the truth is far more unsettling. That brain scan at the beginning of the game was never meant to send Simon anywhere. It was simply a way of recording his mind and creating a completely digital snapshot of his memories, his personality, and even his consciousness. The real Simon Jarrett never woke up on PATHOS-II. He finished the scan, walked out of the clinic, and eventually died almost a century before the game's events even happened. The Simon that we have been playing is a reconstruction, a copy of that original scan, awakened inside an artificial body and carrying every memory the real Simon had up until the moment of the scan. And that is the cruel genius of Soma, because from Simon's perspective, he is real. He remembers his childhood, he remembers Ashley, the car accident, he remembers sitting down for that brain scan. How could he not believe he is the original? If you possessed every memory, every emotion, and every experience of another person, wouldn't you believe you were them too? The game never treats Simon as fake, because he isn't. He's just not the first Simon. And that distinction is what makes Soma so philosophically fascinating. As the story progresses, Simon is forced to transfer into new bodies multiple times to survive increasingly hostile environments on PATHOS-II. And every time this happens, Simon convinces himself he's simply just moving his consciousness from one body to another. Catherine repeatedly tries to explain what's happening, but Simon clings to the comforting idea that somewhere along the way he'll truly become the version that continues forward. He even describes it as a coin toss. In Simon's mind, every transfer is a 50-50 chance. Either he'll wake up in a new body, or he'll be in the one left behind. It's one of the most heartbreaking misunderstandings in the entire game, because there was no coin toss. There never was. Every transfer creates another Simon, a copy of a copy of a copy. One opens their eyes in a new body, and the other remains exactly where they were. Neither version is more real than the other, but both are Simon. The only reason we think the transfer worked is because the game follows the Simon that continues the journey. It's a trick of perspective, not of consciousness. And that very misunderstanding is exactly what leads to what I believe is one of the most devastating ends in gaming history. After everything Simon and Catherine have endured, they finally launch the Ark into space. Humanity's final legacy escapes Earth's inevitable death, carrying thousands of preserved minds towards the stars. But moments before the launch, Simon uploads himself to the Ark, completely convinced that this time he'll wake up inside the paradise. But instead, he opens his eyes exactly where he already was. Still standing in PATHOS-II, still trapped on a dead planet, still alone. The Simon aboard the Ark exists. He's alive, he's safe, and he's with Catherine. But the Simon we've spent the entire game controlling never went anywhere. For him, nothing changed. His outburst towards Catherine is absolutely heartbreaking because from his perspective, everything they've worked towards has failed. He screams that she lied to him, that they were supposed to make it, But Catherine never lied. She understood from the very beginning how the scans worked. Simon simply never accepted the truth. He wasn't transferring his consciousness. He was creating another version of himself with the exact same memories leading up to that point. As Simon lashes out, Catherine's module suddenly loses power. Her voice cuts out mid-conversation, leaving Simon completely alone and in the dark. It is one of the quietest endings in gaming. No music, no final boss, no dramatic farewell, just silence. And a man realizing he'll spend the rest of his existence at the bottom of an ocean on a world that has already ended. Then, after the credits, Soma gives us one final scene. Another Simon opens his eyes. This time it's bright, the sky is blue, trees sway in the wind. He is on the Ark. Catherine is there waiting for him, smiling as she welcomes him into humanity's final refuge. It is a beautiful ending, and an absolutely devastating one. Because both endings are happening at the exact same time. One Simon gets eternity in paradise, while another Simon is left behind in the dark forever. Neither is more real than the other. They're simply two people who shared the exact same memories right up until the moment that their paths diverged. And that is the brilliance of Soma. It doesn't end by asking whether Simon survived. It ends by asking a much more uncomfortable question. If both Simons genuinely believe they're the real Simon, which one would you say is you? Even years after finishing Soma, I still find myself thinking about it. Not because I remember every monster encounter or every tense chase sequence, but because I can't stop thinking about the questions that it's asking. Questions that don't have an easy answer. What makes us who we are? Is consciousness just something unique, or is it simply information that can be copied? If every memory, every emotion, and every part of your personality could be perfectly recreated, would that copy still be you? Soma never tries to answer those questions for us, and I think that's exactly why it's become such a beloved game. It trusts the player to wrestle with the ideas long after the credits roll. For me, that's what elevates Soma beyond just another horror game. It's a game that uses horror as a vehicle for philosophy, forcing us to confront ideas that are far more unsettling than any monster hiding in the dark. I would love to hear your thoughts down in the comments. Did you agree with Simon's perspective throughout the game, or were you with Catherine from the very beginning? And after everything that we've experienced, do you think Simon on the Ark is the same Simon that we followed, or is he an entirely new someone? If you enjoyed this deep dive, then be sure to leave a like if you did, subscribe if you'd like to see more discussions like this, and let me know what game or movie you would like me to explore next. And until next time, remember, stay spooky.